Classical music is likely one of the most well-known musical genres. Everyone knows who Bach and Beethoven are, and everyone likely knows tunes like Ode to Joy. Despite a lot of classical pieces being common knowledge, there are many differing opinions on it. And despite the differing opinions ranging from pure hatred to adoration, classical music is used as a focus tool along with being used in a lot of modern media. When thinking of classical music, many think of 1700s Europe, but classical music greatly impacts modern music as well. There are 4 different eras of Western classical music: the Baroque era, the Classical era, the Romantic era, and the 20th century and beyond. The Baroque era was from 1600 to 1750 and introduced Bach. This era was defined by the harpsichord, which was an early keyboard. It also introduced the concept of concertos, sonatas, and operas. Pieces from this era also may feature the instrumentalist improvising the dynamics of the piece. The Classical era was from 1750 to 1830 and introduced Mozart, Beethoven, and Schubert to the scene. The piano then replaced the harpsichord, and wind and brass instruments started joining the orchestra. Melody was heavily emphasized during this period, and composers became more specific about dynamics. This era also introduced string quartets and concertos that featured one soloist. The Romantic era was from 1830 to 1900 and featured more emotional music. Harmonies became more interesting, and instrument developments continued. The 120-person orchestra became popular and added more wind instruments like piccolo and trombone, which were previously not present. Composers also began writing to describe a sort of scenery, like in Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony 6, which was meant to describe the countryside. Classical music style began to diversify into differing subgenres. Because of the multiple wars in the 1900s, the Soviets and Nazis restricted composers, and they had to write in styles that countries deemed fit to release. Toward the end of the 1900s, film and video game music gained popularity with people like John Williams and Hans Zimmer. The first example that came to my mind was the 2011 anime Hunter x Hunter, whose soundtrack was by Yoshihisa Hirano. And his birthday was yesterday, which is very, very cool. December 7th, that's cool. It features many different takes on classical music. Rhapsody on the theme of Holst is heavily based on Jupiter from Holst the Planets. Here is a comparison. And the piece Ride is heavily based on Dies Irae from Mozart's Requiem. So here's a comparison. Both these pieces are used to emphasize emotional and grand moments within the show. John Williams also used a lot of themes from the planets in Star Wars. For example, the opening scene of A New Hope has a soundtrack that sounds very similar to Mars the Bringer of War. So here's that comparison. The show Squid Game also features classical music in it, such as the big example, The Blue Danube by Johann Strauss II. And the calm waltz style of it kind of lulls you into a sense of security when you should be stressed out. When classical is used for visual media, prior knowledge of it can make you feel differently. If you hear loud opera voices over a blaring brass section, you could probably assume what you are seeing is epic or maybe scary. A calm waltz such as the Blue Danube should make you feel comfortable or calm, and if you watch Squid Game, you know it completely exploits that. Classical music also heavily influenced pop music. Franz Schubert wrote over 600 songs over his lifetime, and he usually had two different ways of going about it. The strophic way, which was a repetition of the melody through each verse, and the through composed form featured a different melody for each verse, which established the verse and chorus structure of pop music. Classical music also influenced pop's consistent rhythm. Classical music features small tempo changes at the most, and pop music rarely features any tempo changes as well. In conclusion, while many really dislike classical music, a lot of beloved modern media and music features and includes elements from classical music. Without the verse-chorus structure, the famous melodies, and techniques that originate from classical music, we likely would not have the same music we have today. While you are free to feel how you want about classical music, it is undeniable that it greatly impacts modern music.